Hi, and welcome to our series, From Fear to Love. I'm Robin Paris, and this is my co-host, Dr. John Querci. Boy, have I waited a long time to be the one to introduce you. And tonight, we have a new segment. It's called Uncommon Ground.
Uncommon Ground is where we profile people who have created from nothing in the face of no.
We have a very special guest tonight that we are really privileged to have. His name is Bruce Probst, and he is the Senior Vice President of HBO. Stay tuned.
Your wallet.
Journey with me, baby. Take you on a ride. Cut the chase, let's race down to the lifestyle. Judging makes you crazy. Easy is so free. Come with me, 'cause mentally I'm lovely. To be loved, fearlessly to be loved, so holy. BuddhaBaby, shake me in my belly. To be loved, fearlessly to be loved, so holy. BuddhaBaby, shake me in my belly.
Welcome, Bruce Probst. What I'd like to ask you a question about is, how did you get to Manhattan? How did you get to where you're at today? What brought you here? Where'd you come from? Who are you?
That's a good question. I'll try to make it a very short story. So I grew up in Ohio in a very kind of lower middle class family. Worked on a farm when I was a young man. And then went to the military when I was 17 and served in Vietnam for a while. And when I got out of the military, I decided to go to college and let the government pay for it. And so I started as an eternal student. In fact, I started studying philosophy, political science. Then I got into mass media communications and finally acting. And I was about 20 hours short of having 4 bachelor degrees, but the government money started running out, and then I got offered to go to get a Master of Fine Arts of Acting at Cornell. So that's how I got to New York as an actor and started acting and did some off-Broadway things and some TV commercials and some soap operas. But I found that I needed another way of making an income, so I decided that I should learn a little bit about computers. This was in the early 80s, and the computer industry was definitely in need of people, and they were taking anybody with a liberal arts degree, so I started studying computers. A friend of mine got me a job at the Time Inc. magazine group, worked there for about a year, and then he moved to HBO and said, hey, would you like to go with HBO? This is a fairly new company, and I went there, and over, now it's been almost 30 years, found I had a real knack for computer programming and built a lot of what runs HBO and helped build HBO On Demand and the new HBO Go broadband application. So it was a number of what later one of my spiritual teachers would say I thought was a coincidence, but he said, what makes you think it was a coincidence? It's very, very long.
Well, there's no such thing as coincidence.
No,
There's only
very found that
synchronicities.
out, absolutely.
And it's really interesting how it brought you here to this fine city. I think what's so important is your background. I mean, you're a farm boy. You're a farm boy from a farm state, and somehow you meandered through the process, and by synchronicities ended up at HBO, which at that time was a young upstart with questionable potential. And you came up with some very bright ideas on how to make it work.
Absolutely.
And now 30 years later, you're in Manhattan at HBO, and you gave up the farm in Ohio. But
Still a little farm boy in me.
Oh, that's good. That's what got you here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know what's really important, and this is really what I want to get across. Our series is all about baby steps. First thing is you have to make the choice what you want to do. You had to make a big choice to say, I'm going to Manhattan, or I'm going to college, or I'm going to specialize in this or that. But you made the choices. You got to a certain point. And looking backwards, there are probably a few, 2, 3 major little recipes that allowed you to become who you are today. And they're philosophical usually. So can you just elaborate on some of those?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful experiences I think I had was the military. Let me explain that, because a lot of people have a reaction to the military and this idea of going in and becoming, which I actually was, a fairly well-trained warrior. But that wasn't the interesting thing. The interesting thing about it was that you actually came up against yourself. You were put in situations where you had to do things that you felt you couldn't possibly do, right? I can remember, well, I'll just give you a little background on my military career. I went in at 17 and became a military policeman. Well, think about that for a minute. A 17-year-old carrying a gun who is now a cop, which is a kind of scary proposition to begin with. But over time, I actually wound up in an actual special, at that time, a special unit, and they trained us with Green Berets. What was interesting about it is you had to do things like rappelling off the side of a cliff and out of helicopters. Well, you can imagine the first time that you do that, how frightening that is. And the frightening thing is that you have, your back is to the cliff, and you have a DI in front of you saying, back up, and the next thing you know, you're falling. And if you don't know what to do, you have to grab that rope and then walk down the side of that cliff. It's fascinating, because what it begins to give you is this sense that the things that you think are impossible are in fact something that you just don't know, you don't understand. But once you've done them, you realize, I could probably do anything. I could probably do anything that I put my mind to. And I think that was one of the most powerful experiences that I had, was going through that kind of training and learning and being put into conditions that I didn't understand, I didn't know, and had a lot of fear that I couldn't do it, and then overcoming it.
Isn't it interesting what you said? Fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, and certainly everything that we do in life, nothing is ever lost.
Right.
So you take that experience of really having to look at something that absolutely terrified you, and you had to perform it. So when you got to HBO, we talked about you creating HBO on demand. Was that your idea, or was that something that the higher ups said we're looking to do something with?
Well, yeah, it's an
because it
interesting
changed
question.
the face of television.
It wasn't that we actually created HBO on demand. At the point that was being done, the cable companies already had movies on demand, but they were the kind that you pay, $4.95 for, and you watch it and then it's done. What didn't exist was the thing called subscription video on demand, which said, here's 150 things, and you can watch any one of them you want at a time, and you play it. And there were a lot of technical problems, both from our side about how do we get them to the cable companies, and then there were issues about, well, how does this thing work? How do you make the menus work and things like that? And we actually had to, because it didn't exist, we had to actually build an application that ran in what was called the Full Service Network, which was a test down in Orlando that we did. And through that, we encountered numerous amounts of problems. But I think it's very similar, right? That I've always had this feeling that just nothing was insurmountable. Anything that someone made, you can, or anything that someone conceives of, you can actually do. It's going to take time, it's going to take an effort, and it's going to take a certain quality of thought, but you actually can do anything. You truly can do anything.
You know what's so fascinating? Whether you're rappelling down the cliff, creating HBO on demand, or falling in love, there's no difference.
No, there's no difference. And you know the fascinating thing, even to go back a little bit before that, and I know Robin can relate to this as well. One of the interesting things was actually going on stage the first time. Because I had never acted, and when I got into acting, I got into it as a bet. And somebody said, well, I'll bet you can't do that. And I said, sure, I can do anything. And it's interesting, it's a completely different kind of fear.
Sure.
Right? There's a kind of, let's use the word considering. You know, you walk on the first time and you think, wow, everybody's looking at me. Oh my God, am I okay? Do I look okay? Am I going to make an idiot of myself? Am I going to fall down? Or is everybody going to laugh at me? Is everybody going to boo at me or whatever? And you realize that and this was a very cathartic moment for me too, another learning experience. I was doing a play called A Month in the Country by Turgenev. And what was interesting was I completely forgot my lines. I just forgot everything. And I was standing on the stage with this other actress, and I looked in her eyes and I could tell she had no idea what to do, right? No idea. And I just dropped everything and I just started talking to her. Just one person to another. And finally we got back to the lines and we kept, we finished the scene and I came off thinking, wow, that was terrible. People are going to just, when I come out for the curtain call, people are just going to throw things at me. Mm-hmm. And so I came out for the curtain call and people were like, bravo. And I asked some friends that I had in the audience and they said, you know what happened is you just became real. Mm-hmm. You dropped all the kind of, and that was to me a moment, a really powerful moment, because all the considering about whether I was going to make a mistake or all that was gone, because I did, it was evident. But I went, by going on and going through it, something else appeared, right? Something, it's not that you can push fear away, but that you can include it, mm-hmm. and that energy can be moved into something productive.
Converted.
Yeah, that's a great point. That fear is it's really not the enemy, because
No.
if you don't fight it and you just let it be, you can transform it.
And the interesting thing about fear is that fear is, if you looked at it from a more objective point of view, fear is truly just an energy.
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
quality of energy in you. It's an emotional energy, but it's your own constructs, your own psychological constructs that create tension around